we will be talking about principles of organizing. Now, in a way, this will come full circle because we've talked about the four activities of the management process. So we've talked about planning, we've talked about leading, controlling, and now we're gonna tackle organizing. Of course, there are certain things, as I would have mentioned in the past, controlling would be something that would be peculiar to project management, for example. But and planning is something that we have talked at length in a previous session. So you can take a look at those videos if you'd like to review elements of planning. Okay, leadership or leading. Sorry, leading is something that would be perhaps dispersed all throughout any course for that matter. But right now, I mean, we can probably say with a little bit of confidence that we will wrap up the four activities of the management process with this lecture or commentary on organizing. Now, as you know, uh, four activities, four parts. Both of them probably at any given point in time would have different weights or different priorities. But this is a good, simple view of how management really works. And later on, when you start to qualify it as IT management, these four parts or four activities are still applicable in the context of IT management. So whether it's just management or IT management, you would expect these four activities or four elements to be present still. Now, what is organizing? Organizing is the process of establishing orderly uses of resources within the management system. Now, you can take a look at keywords here. So, orderly use, order, organizing. Okay, at least it's the very basic or the essential part of the term organizing. Well, order. Okay, of what? Okay, orderly use of resources, putting order into resources. And resources can be natural, physical resources. It can also mean financial resources. It can also mean human labor. Okay. If you recall, we've described the different categories of resources. So all of them would fall into the picture here. All of them would be applicable to what needs to have some orderly use. Okay. But it's not just establishing order with available resources. It has to be within the existing management system. So it's possible that in an organization, as we've noticed the term, right, in any company, there has to be a system that governs the day-to-day activities of that company or that organization. Now, if resources are not included in that scope, then these would be things or these would be items or parts that should not be under the purview of organizing. Okay, so that's something that we would want to think a little bit, right? Uh, and it's possible that companies can reject or waive any application of those available resources if those resources can't be made useful or applicable within the existing management system. So it's not just organizing resources. Okay? It's you might end up having to try to organize everything that's not even within your scope. Okay, so yeah, you're being orderly about it, but that's not organizing. Organizing pertains to your own organization, to your own company, okay, within a system that you have established for your company. Now, why is organizing important? Okay, what are the benefits that we can draw from making sure that this activity of organizing is enforced in any company or organization? Well, this is in relation to planning. This is the primary mechanism used to activate plans. If things aren't orderly in the very first place, then plans typically are useless. Okay? Now, it also creates and maintains relationships between all organizational resources. Well, it's like a tautology, right? It's in the definition. When you try to organize, you're putting order of the available resources. Okay, so naturally, you also want to make sure that the relationships among them is also maintained. So that's what's implied also in organizing. Well, another importance it makes sure that we minimize weaknesses that are costly, weaknesses that would actually entail more resources. Or perhaps we know this to be called as inefficiency. We don't want to be inefficient, therefore we organize things. Because if you're not organized, then we probably have to exert more effort just to be able to do things well. Okay. Now, organizing, mind you, does not automatically mean that you are efficient. You can put certain order in a particular system, but that order may not be your best, but it's still orderly. Okay. So organizing, as long as there's semblance of order, well, there's organizing there. Now, the absence of any organizing activity is chaos, right? It's disorder, is randomness if you want to push the envelope. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we move into the area of organizing or organizing as an activity of the management process, it need not equate immediately as efficiency. We want to be efficient. We want to be better. Okay. And that is going to be a subject of another topic known as organizational change. But in the meantime, just to establish the idea here, organizing need not be efficient from the very beginning. It should just be something better than absolute chaos. Okay. So at least that's what I want to bring up here. But definitely, if you keep on organizing things, eventually these weaknesses that you will notice, the overheads, the unnecessary duplications or redundancies, they can be minimized. Now, the organizing process, again, we'll try to picture this as a linear process, but they can actually hop back and forth. Okay. But if you're starting out and you're trying to find a way to get a grasp of how organizing works, then the organizing process in front of you is something that can be useful. So, first of all, we reflect on plans and objectives. Then you establish major tasks and then dividing the major tasks into subtasks, so breaking them down into smaller parts. And then once the tasks are divided into subtasks, you can allocate resources and directives or instructions for each of the subtasks. And then you execute the tasks, and evaluate the results at the end to see whether you're really successful in doing those tasks and subtasks. Now, Max Weber, one of the philosophers, if you may, have talked a little bit about the philosophy of work also. Well, from him, we actually get what can be called as the basic elements of organizing. Okay, and well, there are four here that's offered for our appreciation. The first one is division of overall work into appropriate tasks. Commonsensical. We know that to be very intuitive. Sometimes we have a big thing that we want to do. We subdivide that big thing into smaller things. Okay. Instinctively, intuitively, as I said, we realize that. Now, what are the other elements? Well, members know what their specific subtasks are. So now we're introducing the additional feature of having more than one person or more than one agent working on the tasks. Okay. Now, members also know to whom they should defer. So hierarchy is actually part of your organizing function or organizing activity of management. That's why you have managers, you have uh, supervisors, you have bosses. In fact, they're actually expressions of organization or the organizing activity. And the last element here is that the task for performance of each member fits together meaningfully with that of their coworkers or their colleagues. So there's that relevance with each other. Now, we go with division of labor. This is the typical, more obvious feature of any organization, that we can divide work amongst each other. Okay, and division of labor is that the assignment of various portions of a particular task or a particular project among a number of organization members. Okay. Now, this presupposes that a task or a project can really be subdivided into smaller, discrete elements that can be worked upon independently. Okay. Now, the importance of division of labor is that if you're able to break it down into smaller parts, and these smaller parts are self-contained, um, that they can be done independently from one another. Okay, and then we realize that certain tasks, if they're divided into subtasks, certain subtasks would probably be similar across different types of tasks. So if you can imagine, let's say a task can be divided into maybe 10 subtasks, and you have 100 tasks that can be divided into 10 subtasks each. And you'll notice that in every task, there is this similar subtask across all the 100. Then the idea there is that people can actually specialize in certain subtasks. So that's the advantage also of division of labor. Okay? Individuals can specialize in doing part of a task rather than an entire task. So they themselves won't just be involved in one task. They can be involved in many tasks because they're able to dip their hand in all of those tasks without having to work on the entire task. Okay. But of course, I mean, collectively, when we bring the organization collectively, everyone is doing all of the tasks. Okay. But they're not doing it 100%. So it's like teamwork in a sense. Now, let's talk about the fundamentals or the ideals or principles of organizing. I'll talk about the mainstream fundamentals, and later on, towards the end of this session, I'll talk about what is called the multi-stream principles of organizing. Mainstream fundamentals of organizing, this is something that we commonly see and, of course, instinctively be aware of. And it's good for us to have labels or categories to what we instinctively know, okay, just to give us a little bit more understanding and cognitive robustness in trying to appreciate things when it comes to organizing. So now let's go with the first idea, of course, standardization. If you're able to organize things, then it's easier for us to make things uniform across the board. So standardization emphasizes uniform practices for the members to follow inside the company or inside the organization. And this can refer to formalized policies or informal standards that are typically enforced, let's say, in an industry, which is much larger than your company or organization. But nevertheless, it's something that everybody follows. Standardization is the first key feature or the key characteristic, mainstream characteristics in organizing. You want to organize yourself according to a standard as much as possible. And it makes sense. If you have a standard, then everything will be orderly, okay? And things are easier to implement when you already have a benchmark or a frame that you'd like to use. And if everyone does it, then there's a certain level of predictability, right? If you do this now, and if you do the same thing tomorrow, then you know what's going to happen tomorrow. If you're going to do the same thing next week, you know what's going to happen next week as far as outcomes go. So that's also an advantage of standardization. It gives you predictability. It gives you a sense of confidence that, okay, whatever it is that you do, okay, the outcomes that you expect to happen at the end of it is perfectly fine. Now, the consequences of standardization. Now, you have to understand that it has to be done in moderation in a way. Obviously, if there's too little standardization, well, everybody in the company would lack direction. They'd lack motivation, and the legitimacy of the organization is suspect. Kind of weird, right? I mean, if there's no standardization, you can't really call your organization organized. It's a misnomer, and you're starting to be skeptical with the ability of the leaders or the managers in that organization to run the company. Okay, but being too standardized is also a problem. Okay, you'll be frustrated. Okay, this typical notion of red tape or bureaucracy, if you've heard of it. Okay, that's because things tend to be too standardized. Creativity can also be stifled. So your opportunity to grow as an organization, well, growth is possible only if there's change. But if there's too much standardization, you are presuming that change will not be possible. So creativity is also hampered. Okay, there is going to be an experience of overwhelm. Okay, and at the same time, you might undermine people. You might disrespect them along the way. Okay, because you've already relegated everyone to a process or to a number. So it's not also humane in that sense, right? So you can see the dangers. Obviously, too little standardization. Nobody wants that. But you also don't want too much standardization. It creates a static or stunted growth for your organization. You also want to grow, but you also want to be stable. So, okay, there's that going to be delicate art when it comes to standardization. Now, what's the next principle? Specialization. We've foreseen that in division of labor. So the grouping of standardized organizational tasks into separate jobs. So now you imagined earlier we had like many tasks to be done. Each task can be subdivided into subtasks. Okay. Now each of those subtasks, we try to group similar subtasks together. Okay. And that is specialization in action. And then later on, you can form jobs, positions, roles within the organization. Okay. That's actually specialization in action. Okay. That's why when you go out, when people graduate from college or from school, and they try to apply for jobs. Well, these jobs are already expressions of specializations, okay, inside a very big company. Okay. That's why you notice that if the company is still small, the opportunity or the degree of specialization isn't high. Chances are you'd probably do a lot of things. Okay. And this is noticed in startups. In startups, you don't really have fixed functions like accounting, like HR. None of that really exists in a startup. You'll probably do all of them. So specialization, the degree of specialization is not high in startups. Okay? Or in young companies, they're not really specialized. Okay? But as the organizations grow, then the opportunity to specialize happens. Okay? And then you can have jobs or roles that are specific to the scope. Now, consequences of specialization. Okay, we have that spectrum again, the too much and too little. What happens if there's no specialization or too little specialization? Well, same experience. Members lack direction and understanding of the role because they'll end up probably doing a lot of things, and they might be doing things that initially they don't think is part of the role. Okay. There's also that sense of reduced proficiency because you don't really allow yourselves to focus on a specific skill set that is presumed in specialization. Okay? So you're not building expertise if there's nothing specialized. Okay? On the other hand, too much specialization can be boring, can be dull, okay? It's repetitive. And because of that, because of the dullness, there could be high turnover, people resign, they get bored, they get disappointed quickly, then they move right away. Goal displacement, we'll talk about in a while on what goal displacement means, where we're in the alignment of your task to the overall goals of the organization is non-existent or is not aligned. Okay. So what is goal displacement? Okay, it occurs when people become so focused on specific goals that they lose sight of more important overarching goals. So this is similar to what we call line of sight. Now, line of sight, in organizational theory refers to making sure that each of the goals at every level would be connected. So there's that line of sight. So if this smaller goal is related to a higher goal, then there's that line of sight. Naturally, if those smaller goals, okay, suffer fractures, okay, in terms of alignment with the higher goals, then you will have goal displacement. Okay, so there's no line of sight. Okay, and people, when they experience goal displacement, they don't have line of sight. Um, then they start to question themselves. I mean, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Normally, that's the things that you listen, right? Maybe in smaller, or well, I wouldn't want to say smaller, but maybe in younger organizations like clubs or academic teams, right? Student organizations. I mean, if you suffer from goal displacement, you'll notice that some of the members, they will get discouraged and they'll just fade out. They'll probably not participate in organizational activities or in club activities. Okay, because they don't see the connection with the overall vision of the organization, the overall plans of the organization, with what you are supposed to be doing or what is expected from you when you're working in that org or club. Now, another principle in mainstream organizing is centralization. Here, it emphasizes top-down decision making because organization is not just about tasks; it's also about organizing resources, meaning people. Then there is a sense of hierarchy. Okay, centralization is an expression of the fact that you're organizing people. There are managers and there are followers or subordinates. And the idea of centralization is that because you're organizing them according to levels, the ones at the top, managers, executives, they're the ones making the decisions, okay, in order to ensure order deference among the members. So they're the custodians of the order or the custodians of the organization, if you want to look at it that way. And therefore, these managers are the ones who are expected to be the enforcers of that order. So, now, when we talk about centralization, one important concept here is authority and the power that is given to the authority. So authority is formal in nature, formal power given to specific members to arrange resources, assign tasks, and direct activities of other members. Okay. So your bosses are a necessary part of any organization because they actually do this. Okay. And there are two types of authority. You have your line authority, which has the power to direct and control. And typically, this is what companies or HR management literature calls hiring and firing powers. They can actually determine whether you can stay in the organization or where you have to be thrown out. Okay. And that power is expressed through immediate subordinates. Okay. Even subordinates of subordinates, okay, if in case of larger organizations. Now, staff authority, it's also formal power, but it's to advise and provide technical support for others, but not to tell them what to do. It is possible that a single person, a single manager, would have both authority. They have power because it is a role granted to them, and they have power because the mere fact that they're actually experts in that field. And this is something similar to how Apple, the company Apple, has organized itself. They don't really have divisions. They have what is known as functions. They have people who are really experts in that particular domain, and they're the ones who are given the power, the authority to make decisions for the organization. So they're not like typical IT organizations wherein they're divided according to markets. Wherein, okay, somebody takes care of the manufacturing market, and then another division takes care of the financial sector, okay, and another division takes care of the educational sector, okay. So it's organized according to markets. Apple, on the other hand, are organized according to skill sets, okay, or functions, okay, in that sense. And that is an expression of staff authority, okay, more than line authority. Of course, as part of the basics of organization or organizing activities, well, you need to have line authority somehow. So it is unthinkable to to think that there is such a thing as a flat organization where there is no authority. That's not possible. A flat organization is actually an antithesis of organization. Okay, you will need to have some authority. Now, how that authority is expressed, now that's a different question. And that's why you will hear a lot of stories about bossy bosses, right? I mean, bosses that are very difficult to manage, or bosses that are very compassionate and empathetic, okay, towards other people. Now, delegation, okay, is part of authority. They're actually a process of giving authority to a person or a group to make decisions in a specified sphere of activity. Now, delegation is like entrusting a portion of the inherent authority in that manager or leader to another person. Could be another manager, another leader, perhaps of a lesser stature compared to that person, or it can be to anyone, an individual contributor. Okay? Somebody who may not be handling people, but that person is given authority to do what? Well, mainly for decision making, okay? Make calling the shots, and actually running things on their own. Now, the more authority managers delegate to others, the more decentralized the organization is. Okay. And the level of centralization may vary from department to department within the organization, or between the organization and the department. Okay. And in management literature, there is a recent trend towards greater decentralization. But again, towards decentralization, but not exactly flat, wherein there's no authority. I think that's not possible. Although there has been a recent experiment, at least I've seen this in the US, the case studies in the US. They call this holocracy, wherein, in effect, it's like I can do whatever I want, and that's fine for the company, right? That's quite unthinkable because you are expecting that person to be really mature enough to know what is really important. Okay, there are a lot of examples of holocracy in the US. I believe Zappos would be one of them, if you've heard of Zappos. Um, the founder, I think, passed away, Tony Hsieh. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of companies who are following the gospel of holocracy, which is a real decentralized model. But that's something that I don't know if it's going to be particular to the Western culture, where they're really emphasized towards meritocracy, okay, or the merit of people, right? In the Eastern cultures, okay, the Asians, um, delegation is not that well appreciated, okay, and sometimes for good reasons, perhaps. Uh, that's why it's a little bit cultural, right? And I mean, perhaps there's no right or wrong model when it comes to authority and delegation, right? Sometimes it's also a function of the culture. So Eastern companies may not have a lot of delegation that's happening. The Western companies might have a huge amount or degree of delegation present. Now, here's another term for you to remember: span of control. You'll hear that often. This refers to members over whom a manager has authority. Now, there is what is known as an immediate span of control, meaning this would be the number of direct reports that a manager would have. But you can also have the general span of control, which is nothing more than your entire organization under the manager. So this would refer to your immediate span of control and the spans of controls of those beneath your direct reports. So in effect, this would be your entire organization. So loosely, span of control and organization size can be interchanged in the specific context of the overall span of control of the top manager or the top leader. But span of control typically refers to the immediate span of control. Okay, the number of direct reports that report to a given manager. Now, this is another term that you'll be hearing often. Certainly, if you've gone through project management, you'll see this debate or this distinction, however you want to call it, responsibility versus accountability. Now, responsibility refers to the obligation or duty of members to perform assigned tasks. So, what they need to do. Accountability, on the other hand, the expectation that members will have compelling reasons for decisions they make. Now, uh, in effect, you can look at responsibility and accountability, the difference in this manner, right? Responsibility would refers to what needs to be done. Okay, needs to be done. The obligation or duty, what needs to be done. Okay, accountability is what's expected of me. Okay, it's possible that the responsibility and accountability overlaps. So what is expected of me might be something that I need to do, in which case the responsibility and accountability overlaps. But it is also possible that they don't overlap, that the expressions of responsibility is different from the expression of accountability. And that's possible. And you'll see that variation, that discrepancy more pronounced as that person moves higher up in the organization. In fact, leaders, especially if they're top leaders, they're practically not responsible for anything that happens uh, at a granular level, right? You don't expect the president of a manufacturing company to actually go to the plant and actually create the goods himself or herself. So the responsibility for that is no longer expected from the president of that manufacturing company. But that president is accountable to make sure what? To make sure that products are delivered on time. Okay? But in order for the president to actually fulfill that accountability, certain people need to be responsible with their tasks. That's the difference. And, uh, and sometimes people get confused. This is a typical issue of new managers who get promoted very quickly because they were so involved in expressing or fulfilling their responsibilities. They don't understand immediately that when they become managers or managers of managers eventually, the amount of responsibility needs to be delegated already to those in their charge. Okay? And they become more accountable for the overall expectation of that organization. Okay, so that's the difference between responsibility and accountability, and something you want to look into. An optimal level of centralization aids timely and coordinated decision making, facilitates interpersonal relationships. Okay, that's important, especially when you're dealing with manager subordinate, that interaction. Okay? And facilitates interpersonal relationships among members and organizational commitment. Now, what are the consequences of centralization? Again, you have both ends of the spectrum, too little or too much. Let's start with too much centralization. If it's too centralized, what are the dangers for that? Slow decisions, maybe dictatorship. We all don't want that. Okay? Unrewarding for members. You know, they can't express their creativity. They can't express their own agency or initiative. There will be limits to a sense of belongingness because they can't express themselves at work. They're just practically told what to do. That's the danger of too much centralization. Now, what about too little centralization to the point that it's decentralized? Well, you are actually bordering on chaos or disorder, uncoordinated decisions, uh, feelings of being overwhelmed, chaos. We've talked about that. Some members may not even have the tools and abilities necessary to make good decisions. They might be what we call being set up to fail. And that's possible with decentralization that goes out of control. So again, we're seeing a spectrum here. Again, just like the first two elements of specialization and standardization. Now, the fourth item, or the fourth mainstream fundamental for organizing is departmentalization. To departmentalize things, okay? Grouping members and resources in a way that achieves the work of a larger organization as efficiently and harmoniously as possible. So from the term, it's actually forming departments or teams within a larger collective. Okay? Now, what are the dimensions of departmentalization? So for focus, your department should be focused on something. There's a very narrow scope or a narrower scope that they need to look into. So focus is concerned on the content of what each department is assigned to do. Okay. And then membership stability. Okay. Department membership refers to the degree of permanence or stability of different departments and teams and groups. So you want to make sure that uh, how your departments are composed. Okay, the members of that department, are they going to be like revolving doors, like you'll have new members every so often, or are they going to be a little bit more stable or static over a long period of time? So those are the things that you'd want to consider when you want to form departments. What's the focus of that department and the composition of that department? How long do you want that to stay? Now, when we look at focus, so let's look at focus. Okay, the basic structure of trying to form your departments according to focus. Well, you can come up with functional departments. So members are placed into the same department based on having similar technical skills and using similar resources to perform their tasks. Now, there are many advantages to this. In-depth skill development. So at the individual level, persons will grow. Economies of scale, you can actually do more things with fewer people because they're now experts in that field. They're not going to do anything else except those that's assigned to them. There's going to be some increased span of control. Okay, it is a little bit double-edged. It can be an advantage. It can also be a disadvantage if the span of control is really wide. And because there's economies of scale, then you can actually lower management costs. Now, another structure would be divisional. Okay, so you try to departmentalize according to divisions. Okay, so members are placed together based on their working as a subunit. Okay, that provides a specific kind of product or service, serves similar customers, or works in the same geographic region or market. So earlier they are functional, like Apple, we were mentioning about that just a while ago, or divisional. They are actually working according to specific markets. Now, what are the advantages here? Well, there's a faster response to changing customer preferences and greater ability to accommodate different customer needs based on region or customer groups. Okay? More well-rounded members who understand and coordinate with members from different functional areas. Or you can have both, a hybrid structure according to focus. You try to combine the advantages of both a functional approach and a divisional approach. Now, you probably have heard of this in our earlier sessions, is that in a hybrid approach, this is where the matrix organization comes into the picture. Okay. So you can have both divisional and functional departments working at the same time. Okay, and members are simultaneously assigned to two managers, one functional and one divisional. Now, what about membership stability? What are the typical structures of a department? Okay, well, you can have a network structure. So organizations enter fairly stable and complex relationships, okay, with a variety of other organizations that provide essential services, including manufacturing or distribution. Okay, so network, I mean, typical network nodes, connections among each other, and they're organized in that way. So a team would be composed of people with different set of skills, okay, that they can interact with one another, okay. Or you can have a virtual organization, okay? So they're not really fixed, okay. They can work in different markets and different geographies, okay. And they're characterized by members who come in and go on in an as needed basis and are networked together by IT. I mean, this is a more recent phenomenon, okay, fueled by internet connectivity. Okay, but the old structures of the past, right? I mean, the old structures, the idea of a virtual organization wasn't really something that they've foreseen. Okay. And switching is a term that you normally encounter, the extent to which membership in a virtual organization changes over time. So it switches, it changes. In 1 year, this is your department. In another year, it will change to a different department. Now, we're done with the four mainstream fundamentals of organizing. So we've talked about standardization, specialization, centralization, and departmentalization. That's mainstream. But nowadays, when we're looking at how organizations are organized, okay, there's that idea of multi-stream approach. Okay? So the mainstream approach, obviously, there are some limitations. They're focused on content, and it emphasizes rational competence. But multi-stream, and this is something that you get to see now in a lot of the organizations, they're focusing on the process and emphasizes relational competence, relationships. In the mainstream approach, you're looking on the endowments of the resources. What are their skill sets? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Now, in multi-stream, you understand that these are not fixed. The content is not fixed. It can change over time. Perhaps now you don't have skills in accounting, but maybe after 2 or 3 years, you could be an expert in accounting. Therefore, you're probably be better off in an accounting function later on. But now you're not. And that's the thing. If you just use mainstream, you'll never see the possibility that people can actually acquire new skills or develop new capabilities that would help the organization grow. Now, multi-stream looks at the process. That's possible now. And it looks at the relationship of the different sets of endowments or competencies that an organization would have. Now, what are the principles available in multi-stream, okay, or the multi-stream fundamentals of organizing? You can probably match the first four with this next four. Okay, you'll probably see the connection. So the first idea is experimentation. It is like the opposite of standardization, right? Standardization, it's fixed. Okay, and the reason why it's fixed, there's a certain level of predictability, efficiency, and the likes. Experimentation is like the antithesis of standardization. The emphasis of trying to do new things on a trial basis, right? And it's voluntary. Nobody's asking you to try new things, right? Everybody's left. Okay, you do it. I'll give you the space to do it. You work on it. You try things out, okay? And the idea there, the things that you just want to take a look into is that, okay, ensures that work activities are completed in the best way. Okay. It focuses on the dynamic process of organizing, experimenting, trying things out, rather than the static outcome of organizing, which is standards or expected outcomes, right? And along the way, you get to assess the effect of stakeholders within that process. Okay. So the quote-unquote older way of doing it, or the mainstream way of looking at standardization, well, the multi-stream way of doing it is experimentation. Now, what are the consequences of experimentation? Well, again, spectrum, too little, too much. Okay, the problems with too little experimentation, the organization plateaus, there's stagnation, rigidity, complacency, lack of growth. We'll see that. A lack of new knowledge, which, as you know, would put the organization at a disadvantage. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, too much experimentation, well, chaos, uncoordinated efforts, waste of energy, waste of money. Okay, that's the danger of too much experimentation. Now, what's the next principle for multi-stream organizing? Well, sensitization. Okay, emphasis on searching for and responding to needs and opportunities to improve the status quo. So being sensitive. Now, in a way, you can see this as the opposite of specialization. In specialized, okay, the person is fixed. This is what I am good at. This is what I'll keep on doing. But sensitization understands that that person is also going to grow. That person is eventually going to get bored with whatever he or she is doing. Okay, so that's something that you want to address. Okay, so ensures that members know what subtasks they should perform. Okay, that's the starting point of specialization. Eventually, it encourages members to be sensitive to new needs and opportunities. and to continuously adapt and improve how they do their jobs in harmony with others. So the ability of sensing things out. Okay. In fact, a related leadership trait here would be the idea of leadership as sense making. So leaders have to always be sensitive to what's happening around them and learning how to adapt. Okay. So sensitization is like your prerequisite for adaptability. Okay. So that's the like the antithesis of specialization. Now, when tasks are divided into separate jobs, the multi-stream managers, or the ones who you follow the multi-stream approach, tend to do so at the group level, while mainstream managers tend to do so at the individual job holder level. Okay. Multi-stream job descriptions focus on the interrelationship among members. So they know that the relationship of roles or functions or positions dynamically change. Okay. And the people who hold these jobs, they can also change as well. Okay. Now, multi-stream focuses on the complementary skills of the team as a whole, collectively, in contrast to the mainstream focus of the individual's particular skills. Now, what are the consequences? Okay. Again, too little, too much, spectrum. Too little, sensitization, okay, hinders creativity, feelings of social justice, and environmental concern. You start to feel that that others are being unfair to you, that you're being pigeonholed into something that you know this is not going to be forever, right? And problems with too much sensitization, another overwhelming feeling, okay, can be overwhelmed, okay, can stress limited resources, okay. So because you're always on the lookout for something, you always try to adjust whatever happens along the way. So that's the danger of being too much, okay, sensitive. Okay. Now, dignification. Okay, so the emphasis on treating everyone with dignity and respect in community. Okay, so in a way, this is like an antithesis of centralization, wherein you want people to, I mean, they're their own persons. Okay, you don't want to be dictatorial with the person in the case of a centralized setup, but you are respecting that each one can actually do the work independently on their own, a sense of autonomy. Okay. Now, naturally, you start off with something that's centralized, okay, or what is known as the orderly deference among members. Okay, that's espoused in centralization. But later on, you also provide the people with appropriate choice and freedom. In a way, you're telling them, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is your place under the sun in the company. But do what you think is best for the organization. Okay, that would help you grow and perform. Now, dignification is more likely in relatively decentralized organizations, as we said or just now, where authority resides in groups rather in a few individuals. Now, what are the consequences of dignification? Well, too much, too little again. Okay, so problems with too little dignification. Well, we see that. I mean, the dictatorial setup, okay, decreases people's sense of self-worth and enjoyment in work. Okay, or problems with too much dignification, where we allow the people to run things on their own, so to speak. Well, you neglect some stakeholders because you're only concerned about yourself, right? So everybody is just concerned about themselves. You forget, well, okay, wait a minute, we have customers to serve also. Okay. It may result in low accountability and responsibility for self and especially for others. Because now you're trying to be more focused about yourself. Okay, there's that danger to the point that you forget that there are other stakeholders. Okay, typically, the ones who suffer immediately would be the customers. Like you tend to deny the customers already because I take care of myself. I'll do what I want, right? In that attitude. Okay. And lastly, okay, is participation. Okay, which is like the antithesis of your departmentalization. Okay, where everyone's pigeonholed into this function or into this group. Okay, and I don't care about everybody else. The silo mentality. Okay, this gives emphasis to mutuality. Okay, and giving stakeholders a voice in how the organization is managed and how jobs are performed. So in departmentalization, people are just concerned about, okay, this is my department, this is what I do. I don't really care about everything else. But in a participation approach, okay, I'm also concerned about other departments, other units. And not only me, I'm also concerned. If I'm the customer, I also participate in how the company is also operating. That's an even bolder way of doing it. Okay. But nevertheless, you also have to start off with the idea that there are departments or structures so that there is harmony from the very beginning. But later on, you start to expand the idea of letting others participate. Okay, people outside of your department or unit can also participate in whatever it is that you're doing. That's the idea of participation. So, in this sense, we said departmentalization would have two dimensions, right? Focus and membership stability. So, in focus, well, multi-stream managers tend to prefer divisional rather than a functional structure. Okay, we've seen that now, especially that there's less and less specialization in a multi-stream approach. Multi-stream managers tend to prefer relatively small divisions. Uh, to 120 to 150 members, that's an arbitrary number. I mean, in some cases, that's your entire organization, right? You're probably looking at this from the perspective of a large organization like a multinational. Let's say in the Philippines, if you have a multinational of 10,000 employees, well, 120 to 150 is small. Okay. But the idea is that you want to have relatively small divisions because each member would have a sense of the overall goals of the unit and how the roles of each member would fit together. So there's more at stake with each one. Right? Of course, if your division is really, really large, then your sense of participation diminishes. Now, membership stability, the other dimension for departmentalization. Here, for multi-stream, well, you include and invite participation of external stakeholders, even those who are not part of your department or unit. Okay, and participation refers to the emphasis on mutual discernment and giving stakeholders a voice on how the organization is managed. So let's say, I mean, in the case, let's say of a school, I mean, this would refer to making sure that students or parents of students are also involved, or suppliers or industry partners. They're also involved in how the organization or how the university operates. So that's the whole idea also of organization in a multi-stream manner, right? And virtual departments can facilitate communication among members across the organization. Now, what are the consequences of participation? Again, you have that proverbial spectrum again, too little, too much. Too little participation, okay, dictatorship. Okay, you see that. Less enthusiastic following of members. Okay, people will get disengaged. Okay. In fact, that's another measurement that you want to look into. The engagement levels of an organization. How engaged are the employees? Okay. And because there's too little participation, then uh, there's not a lot of information that gets considered in every decision making process. So poorer decisions are made. Okay. Now, on the other hand, is there a problem with too much participation? Well, yeah, that's also possible. But because you are participating the activities that presuppose participation, well, you have lots of meetings. You need to coordinate often, right? You need to manage the expectations, the emotions of people, okay, in a very diplomatic manner. Okay, you can have death by meetings. You can have so many meetings, okay, which would lead to inefficiency because now you have to ask each and every person who are not even part of their company. Okay, they're not even paid employees, right? But you need to ask them because you're being participative, right? And the danger of too much participation is that if this is like a mandate from a top, right? Some members may not like to participate at all. So there's that delicate balance between dignification and participation as well, right? I mean, you want people to respect how they want to do things on their own, but if they don't want to participate, well, that's not. There are consequences to that, definitely, but it's going to lead to counterproductive results more than anything else. Okay. And with that, I actually end the session, the topic on the principles of organizing. as a management activity. At this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions if you have any. Are there any questions from the group?